All right. Hello, everyone. We're very happy to be here. We are the SOTS Collective, and Carlos, of course, you all know that. Well, I'm just going to start to thanking him. I want to thank Arnica, Artist-Run Center, the university, TRU, right? And all the staff, volunteers, and people that help with bringing us here. We're very happy. And we're going to talk briefly about our practice as a collective. And this has been said many times. Please do ask questions. There's a Q&A, I guess, set up at the very end. But that will help us to inform you better about our practice. Because you're nervous and you forget things. And but if you have any questions, please ask. And also, I know you guys are busy, but if you have time to go and check out the show, Carlos and Sots, it might make more sense when you walk into the space and all this blah, blah, blah. It might come together. It might not. Doesn't matter. But just visit the show, okay? We put a lot of effort, everybody. So I'm going to let Ileana introduce the collective.
So our name, Sots, is the Mayan word for bat. And the reason we chose this is because when bats arrive to a new place, they hang on to one another and form clusters. And we feel like we're a little cluster within the art community and a little group of Latinos within a larger Latino community in Toronto. The bat in Mayan culture is often associated, even though in Western culture there might be a negative association. A lot of people are maybe afraid of it or associate it with Halloween or with vampires. The Mayans, it's almost the opposite. It's associated with dreaming, with vision, and intuition. And the bats would help the Mayan scribes go to the underworld where they would see what the gods were up to. And then the scribes could come back to Earth and write down everything that they had seen in their codices. We also like the dual nature of the bat, the fact that it's a winged mammal, and it's associated with the individual and the collective. And to us, the bat represents ideas taking flight. So in order to understand our collective practice, we wanted to give you a bit of background on our individual work because we're all individual artists, we're all professional artists, and we have our individual practices, so we make work and exhibit individually as well. Now?
Hello, my name is Naum, and I was born in Honduras. I left Honduras when I was 14, came to Mexico, stayed in the US, and eventually I got to Canada when I was 18. In 1996, I attended the Ontario College of Art and Design, finished in 2001. Since then, I've been practicing my art and exhibiting. I work on mixed media, using a variety of materials, like found objects, repurposed objects as well, and work on the themes of migration, evolution, and history. And now I let Eric talk about his background.
My name is Eric. I was born in Mexico. I came to Canada in 2001. I consider myself as a self-taught artist, although I have some studies in graphic design and animation. But I didn't finish any of those. So you guys do finish your school. It's important. It's very important. I do mainly drawings, work on paper with a little bit of watercolor. Before that, I was really trying to become a painter. So I spent a good chunk of my life trying to paint. And then it didn't work for me. I didn't feel that my ideas were translating properly to the canvas. And slowly moved into the drawing that now is my primarily medium. And in terms of subject matter, I like to explore the ideas of religion and anything that has to be to explain why we're here in this world. Religion or cults or any myths, legends that it's so difficult to understand why we're here, why we live, and then as humans we came with fantastic stories to explain our existence. So based on that, that's my starting point, and then I start to develop my own narrative, and yeah, pretty much. So Ileana.
My name is Ileana Martinez, and I was born in Toronto. My father was Mexican and my mother was Canadian, so I spent a lot of my childhood moving back and forth between Mexico and the US mainly. And I grew up mostly in Mexico City, so I have a real love of cities and of architecture. So my work is kind of a mixture using urban elements, but I also have a love of the natural world. So I'm always in nature, you know, hiking and looking at the scenery and sketching. So I incorporate a lot of landscape sketches in my work, and it's kind of a fusion of my imagination and of things in the cities and things in the natural world. Mainly I work in watercolor and drawing, ink, and it's all pretty small format, about 11 by 15, but sometimes I work in larger series of a lot of drawings. So now we'll speak a bit about how we came together as a collective and how our group was formed.
In 2004, we formed such a collective, and after being member of a bigger collective in Toronto, it was called Trinchera. And Eric, Ileana, and I wanted to form a group where we would, collaborate, and also we would learn from each other. So we decided to meet weekly in my studio. And after a few weeks of getting together, Ileana saw a call for submission, and it was a call for submission by the McLeod Gallery. We decided to apply to this event, and luckily enough, we were accepted. Our proposal was accepted. And this gallery, the McLeod Gallery, was a gallery that existed in suitcases. So for the project, we have to create a suitcase. We have to create work to fit in the space of a confined space of a suitcase. So we created like a lot of different pieces, like using objects. And
we did like a little altar, like a small offering altar, with a kind of fold-out piece that when you exhibit the thing, you pull out, and it was. We saw the thing, and it was just drawings there, and it was very nice because it was our first project, and we got really encouraged because we got results kind of quick, and then we took it from there.
And it was a cross-Canada tour, so every province would have one artist representing the province who would do one suitcase. And so someone traveled from Newfoundland to the West Coast, and they would carry, in each city, they would carry the suitcases around the city, and like impromptu exhibition.
Yes. And the exhibitions, they would show the suitcases in alternative spaces like cafes, train stations, and laundromats. And so it was a fun project.
So now we'll speak a bit about our process.
Do I get to say that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we are a process-oriented group. It's basically what what is more interesting for us. From the beginning to the end, like all that in between, it's what we're focused on. So we can divide our practice in 3 different mediums or activities. So we have works on paper. That was the first thing that we started work with, works on paper. Then we move into large-scale murals that are divided in 2 kinds. The ephemeral ones that are usually or always done within a gallery space, and they're done with pastel, charcoal, and paper cutouts. And there's no preconceived idea, like we just start drawing on those ones. And the permanent ones that are commissioned pieces, and they're done with latex paint, and they have like a 5 years, or give or take, lifetime.
Yes. So the commissions or public murals are interesting it's a different way for us to work because we have to work the idea, before, we have to come out with a kind of like a graphic proposal for the project, and we do that on, gathering different drawings and then working the drawings on the computer.
So I forgot to say something. So we have a system that it's applied to all these three activities with slight difference, but the thing is we are working all together at the same time in different pieces. When it comes to paper, I'm drawing in one piece, Ileana another, and Naum, and then we rotate the work, we pass them around without any particular rule. I'm pretty sure you guys done this collaboration exercise, and it's fun. We are often linked to the Surrealist game, but it's quite different. We are able to see what the other is doing, and if we feel like it, we just jump in and just grab the paper and start adding upon the thing. And as Naum was explaining right now, with the commission murals, it's slightly different because we have to submit a proposal, so city has to approve, and it's changes that can be requested. So we go back and forth with the client, if you will, and we ended up putting everything together on the computer. So it's easy for us to, when it comes to execute the piece, just basically we project it and you just paint by numbers and you get it done, and that's what they want. And so personally, I like more the ephemeral ones that are more intuitive and surprising, sometimes very sad surprises, but it's gonna go, right? It's gonna get erased.
And so for the media that we use when we do the ephemeral murals, it's stuff that can be put on the gallery over a series of days. Like usually it'll take us 3, 4, 5 days, and then we use collage, pastel, and charcoal, and it's something that can be easily removed. And then so that's more about the experience of the place where we're exhibiting.
It is interesting to worth noting that it's so different working a small piece of paper where you're working with your mind and your wrist and your movement, playing with marks and visual elements, and then moving to a public space or a gallery space, right, where you experience the box as a whole, and then you have to animate that kind of those walls, and work with the space. Most of the time, we don't have any idea of what the physical space is like. So it's always a surprise for us, when we come to a gallery like the Arnica Gallery, and then we see the space. And then sometimes we have some ideas in, what we're going to do with the installation, but once you're in the space, you have to, go and animate the space and work with the space.
And and then is the ceramics. So at one point, a friend of Ileana, remember, he suggested, that was our first encounter doing collective ceramics. He suggested that we should do ceramics, but if you want to elaborate on the jump to the 2D and the 3D.
Oh, okay, so I don't know if you mentioned already, we've been together for 14 years working, and we had been working many, many years on paper, doing mainly smaller works, until we had the desire to kind of expand our practice. So we were invited to a residency in Serbia, and it was in a, part of it, the guy who was leading the residency was a ceramic artist. So he invited us to this place that was like an abandoned brick factory where they hold these international ceramic residencies. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you some clay, and you just play around and see what you can do. So that was actually our first kind of formal, our first exercise in ceramic art.
And with the material, again, working with the material, experiencing the clay, and when you're working with clay, you find that the material is so flexible, right? You can draw, you can put any mark, you can subtract, you can add, and so for us, as a collective, that really works well for us, and we really enjoy the
because it's all ludic, and you can detach and add, and it's almost like drawing in a way. It's just in 3D, and it's cool.
So we'll speak a little bit about the advantages of of working as a collective, of being 3 artists working together as opposed to 1 artist working alone?
Well, the only thing that I have to say about that is like, so being a professional artist it's hard, it's tough, and creating the work, it's just half of the battle, right? And you might think like you're gonna put all your energy on that and you're gonna develop your concept and whatnot, but that's just half of the battle. And the other half is just looking for spaces, writing grants, and it's the whole other logistic part, which is 50% or more. And sometimes you spend more time chasing the spaces or trying to find grants or whatever, more than actually producing or creating the work. That's why.
So luckily, when there are 3 minds working together, we each have different strengths and weaknesses. So luckily, we can pool together our strengths and each take on a task that we feel we do best. So, somebody deals with the finances, somebody will do the design, somebody will do the gallery searches, but together as a unit, it's 3 times the amount of manpower, which is very helpful. We also pool our knowledge and making connections and problem solving. When there are 3 of us, obviously sometimes it's more difficult to problem solve, but usually it's a lot easier, even though we do have little battles on occasion. Usually it's a democracy for us, and we do a vote. We put the question forth and say, okay, if 2 want to do something and the other one doesn't, we say too bad. The 2 win.
Yeah. So,
it's also very motivational to have 3 people working together. So we get together on Sunday, and every week we push each other to get together. We try to maintain that consistency, which is really helpful because, I don't know, many of you might know that sometimes we tend to procrastinate. So it's sometimes really hard to be motivated to do work. So it's always good to have the push of another person, saying, okay, we have to meet, and we have to work.
And even if, we meet on Sundays, even if we don't work, it's always, fruitful to get together, talk and, just keep things going, right? Develop ideas and things like that, right? So it's very, very fruitful.
So another aspect of our professional practice, along with making artwork and exhibiting, we do community outreach. We hold workshops, and we're often invited by galleries to do projects in the community, which is also great to have a connection with the people who are coming to see your work, or also with people who might not ever step into a gallery. We can kind of expand and inspire other people to create.
And get inspired too, because it's always like a back and forth thing, right? You're there to give, but to receive too. So it's nice.
Retrofitting.
And
Collective
project.
Upcoming projects.
so we'll spend the last minute or so talking about some projects that we have coming up in the next few months. We've been working about a year or more on a project for the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and the opening is going to be in October. And when we started with ceramics and had the challenge of working with ceramics, all of our pieces were quite small. But throughout the years of work, we've been able to work up to slightly larger. And now some pieces that we're presenting for Montreal, maybe I'll just go forward here. They're actually pretty large. Working as artists, you often have struggles along the way in terms of the learning curve can often be, you put a lot of effort into working, and you don't always get the results you want. Mm-hmm. So this is a prime example of us with ceramics. We didn't really have a ceramics teacher, so for this project, which was a commission, we spent months working on a few pieces, and then we had them blow up in the kiln. So it was like,
that was heartbreaking.
We had to go
Those
back.
pieces doesn't exist anymore.
Back to the beginning, but we kept forth and struggled with it, and we were able to do a series of 8 pieces for
It is
Montreal.
always a learning process, like sometimes you have something in mind, you have an idea, especially when you're doing, working on a project like this, like we propose to the museum something, and then, like one thing is something that you have in mind, right? And another thing is, like the process of executing that something, right? Like in the process, like Ileana said, like we had worked like more than 3 months on pieces, and yeah, like we were so happy with them, and then like all of them came.
And it's it's a nice project because what the museum wanted is us to relate or to establish a dialogue with their permanent collection.
Pre-Columbian permanent collection.
Yeah. So they invite 7 artists from different backgrounds to respond or to establish a dialogue, and so it's going to be nice because these ceramics there will be exhibited along with some of the permanent collection, the permanent collective items.
Yeah,
and for us was also like a research part to go and see what they have and how, but we were loyal to our process, right? So
Yes, it was a pretty good learning experience for us, and so we learned a lot, like from that project.
That will be it, guys.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the waiting. Sorry about that. From Mexico City, based in Vancouver 8 years ago. My background is graphic design in Mexico City, MFA Mexico City, MFA UBC, and now I'm doing my PhD in interdisciplinary studies. So my presentation will be a mix between what I'm doing in my research, how I connect with my artwork, and why I do that kind of projects, okay? So I'm gonna read something, because I hope will be understandable, but here we go. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Baroque was a foundational in creating principles that allowed the European empires to colonize and subdue Latin America. And consequently, these principles continue to develop contemporary alternatives to subjugating Latin American societies. Great. I believe that we're still living in Baroque times. I have to call it Baroque times because there exist 2 different ways to understand the Baroque. One is to talk about the Baroque art style, used primarily in the 17th century to create a bold artwork capable of supporting the Catholic Church against Protestantism in the 16th century. The second way to understand Baroque started with the invasion of Mexico in 1521 by Hernán Cortés. A multiverse of opportunities was developed through colonization in the Americas, and the Baroque art style became the perfect model or mass media at that time during the colonial period to educate indigenous populations in Latin America. This opportunity transmuted the concept of Baroque as a new outlook to develop philosophies capable to create a theory of everything that we can still see nowadays, not just in Latin America region, but also worldwide. I understand the Baroque as stimulated vibrations that generate propagation of elastic waves, producing deformations and tensions on a continuous medium. And at the same time, Baroque is also used as a position of equilibrium, acting as a force zero. According with the force created through the vibrations does not necessarily involve internal deformations of the whole body. The vibrations cause all different kind of waves, or according Severo Sarduy, a Cuban philosopher and writer, simulacrums, that allow the obscurantism, elision, or frustrations. Any force that is applied on an object generates disturbance, and the Baroque is a vibration force to create an entire social, political, religious, economical, and cultural deformations, tensions, and equilibriums. Baroque is the theory of everything. It is a theory capable to navigate between universe, and even if it's not necessary an internal deformation, Baroque is malleable enough to be deformed. Baroque is comparable, or I compares Baroque with the string theory, or the theory of everything. To simplify, string theory is the theory that accepts the existence of multiverse, 10, and 11 dimensions connected by strings through quarks. These strings allow us to travel in different dimensions through wormholes, changing the perception of our universe even before the Big Bang. I conceive Baroque as a multiverse, connected by strings and quarks. Baroque in modern times established formulas around human behaviors or liberties, and the way that we can recognize ourselves in our own worlds or dimensions. Baroque as a theory is capable to travel from one dimension to another, using arcades when we will see the world slightly different from our own, giving us a means of measuring similarities and differences between our world and possible ones. Also, Baroque have access to possible worlds creating different initial conditions, or give us such possible universe theories. Finally, take us at the point in which everything's possible and imaginable is covered. Baroque is defined as a perol irregular, which is irregular pearl in Portuguese, and is described as an oddity that is excessively exuberant. This oddity or kink, as defined in the dictionary, hints at how the Baroque that Spain created transcended in an artistic style. These diamonds absolutes were raw diamonds before, irregular pearls, ready to be cut and polished to have the perfect expression of creation. The absolute diamonds represent the dimensions where time and space are deconstructed to create a new projection of our reality, new perspectives of our universe overlapping and transporting ideologies or histories from one place to another. So the idea of one place to another for me came during the MFA. I came with personally speaking, a powerful MFA in Mexico City, when basically all the students came from Latin American regions. So basically we talk about Latin America over 2 years. And then eventually I have the opportunity to come to UBC, and I have this confrontation again with Latin American theories and Western theories. So the process that I decided to do, not just in my work, also in my theories, is I don't want to produce trinkets. I don't want to produce just objects because I have to, because the school demands artwork to produce. I prefer do research. I prefer be more covered by knowledge and theories that I can use. So basically, the thing that I did is just read everything that Latin America is producing right now and produce at some point. And if there's Western theories, I prefer consume all that theories through philosophers, anthropologists, ethnographers, etc., focusing on Latin America. Okay? So at some point I create this artwork in terms of here and there, what I'm doing, what I want to do, what's my position now, living and working in Vancouver, and reconnect with Mexico City and then the country and Latin America. So at some point I decide be more positive in terms of what I want to express, and be more strong in terms of I'm here, I came here to work, yes, but I came here to absorb and demonstrate you that this is important to create a strong community as well, because I'm part of it. So this is my final project in the MFA program. It's a strike flag. I have a Spanish background, and then Latin America absorbed it in the factories. Mostly the workers use these flags to be on strike. So basically the artwork, there's not exist artwork in the gallery. And I assume, and I understand that basically when I place the flag inside the gallery, automatically it becomes an artwork. But that's not my position. My position is I'm not going to present anything because I don't want to, I don't have to, I don't need to. And the flag is more strong in terms of background and history rather than produce something new. So basically it's like a 4 meters by 6 meters flag in my space. Then I moved to this portrait. It's myself rapping in Guatemalan belts. The uprising of the mask, the iconoclastic riot. Again, focusing on the concept of if you see me, or if you see the artwork, we can see you too. So it's like, be fair in terms of who's seeing who. I've explained like the concept of My background is important as well, your background is important as well, so let's try to do something together. And you don't need to see my face. You don't need to see where I came from, or you don't need to see my skin color or my bad English or whatever. You have to see that I have a background behind me. That's what the mask represents. And it's a Guatemalan belt because I'm not from Guatemala, but I strongly believe in this concept of Latin America united, native Latin America. So for me, there's no differences. I work for Mexico, I work for Latin America, I work for Canada now, and I just want to create that connections. I used to be dishwasher as well. I work in construction. I did translations. This is part of the projects called sign paintings. There's a say, probably you can help me with that, is a jack of all trades. This is my real phone. If you need translations, dishwasher, or something to do in construction, plumber, whatever, you can call me, okay? I can do that too. Being an artist for me means being a worker. We're not detached from society. We have to produce for the society. At the end, we absorb the culture from society. The society creates a culture, not the artists, or not the filmmakers, or not the philosophers. We, as a society, we create our culture. And it's important to fight with that. It's important to work through the society, okay? That's my vision. That's the idea that I have in mind every time that I produce, every time that I found like such a nice persons like Eric, Naum, and Iliana. We have friends in common, talking over and over again about the idea of being here and there, the idea of positioning as a Latin American artist, working and living, having families in Canada. So how can we produce in both sides? This is an artwork that I present in San Francisco last July, last May. It calls Amoxtli. Amoxtli means book in Nahuatl, the Mexica, the Aztec language. And basically the artwork represents how we read. The name of the show calls Artes Medicina. And for me it's more like, it was about a cookbook. How the publisher had cancer, she fought against it, she won the battle, and she just tried to decolonize the way that he eat, going through Latin American cook basis, okay? So she offered this artwork in San Francisco, and for me it's more like the idea of go through a book is like read even how, not just how consume food ourselves, is how we consume food as a society, how fruits, vegetables, or other kind of food came to Canada, how we absorb that process, how the idea of organic at some point in Latin America doesn't exist, because if you go into the market, basically you can have organic food without the label saying organic, okay? But it's just a process of how we have all these images and concepts through everything, even how we live and how we understand that we need to consume. So basically for me it's like, basically read the cardboard behind it. These people working behind it in Mexico. Maybe it's an American company called Aztlan. Aztlan is not the center of Mexico City. That's the Mexica culture. Mexico Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs came from the center of Arizona, Texas, Chihuahua. That area belongs to the Aztecs. So it's not just read the food, it's not just read the people who works behind the food, it's also how you understand, or how we understand ourselves as a Latin American people, the concept of Aztlan, okay? Now, the embroidery is here. I zoom to the greetings to Christine, all the university, the people, the staff who works, the cameraman, thank you. And this artwork is the same. It's a connection of how I can connect with the rest of the people. How can we show my background, and how can I do it more in a present and modern times? So basically the embroideries come from the codex, the Mexican codex. the most part of the codex were recreated during the Spanish colony because they were burned by the Aztecs or the Mexicas and the Spanish at the same time, and they just need to know the history about the people that they conquest. So they recreate or they redraw the codex. This piece calls Omecoat, which means two serpents. At the same time, it's just one. So I work the most part of the time with these embroideries with the idea of the endless circle, the Olin, the movement. And if you put the two serpents together, it creates the face of the greatest goddess in the Mexica culture, which is Coatlicue. So it's like at the end, it's like you're forming. So my propose with this artwork is how can I use language a lot in my artwork, but not just words. Also, pictograms or drawings are also information, as the collective is presenting. That's more strong. That's part of our background. That's part of our history. So why we have to stop to use it? We need to absorb that process again. We have this big gap, or at the end, in the 80s and 90s in Mexico, basically the history was, yes, we have like a kind of cultures around in this territory. The Spanish came, destroyed, and we became a modernity society. That was part of the political speech at some point in Mexico. And fortunately, there's people working on that, and it's like, yes, but there's something beyond that, more strong, that create this idea of mestizaje or mix, which is also like another topic in terms of utopian idea about society, call us mestizos. So for me, the embroideries is how can I use all the information that I have as a Mexican, and how can I produce and present to you? And I found the best materials doing embroidery. This piece called Sorrow and Struggle. It's a female and man, both they're crying, they're talking, doing the tlachtoa, hablar, speak. If you speak blue, you speak beautiful. If you speak red, you're mad, you're angry, so you speak with anger. And at the end, for me, it's also represent the circle. And when I did the embroideries, at some point, requires time, hours sitting, doing other things. I was reading news in Mexico, and specifically this artwork for me is strong because when I was doing the embroidery, at the same time I was reading what happened with the 43 students in Ayotzinapa in Mexico, the missing students by the army. So the thing that I did was, they speak beautiful, they need needs, they speak for the community, they speak for the society, they speak for the country. I'm mad. Of course the society is mad, and we're crying. I cried at that time. It was a bad thing. So that's why I add the tears in these two persons. And usually the Mexicas in the codex or the drawings, they don't use specific gestures. Like Western painting, for example, is basically just one description for everybody. And then you describe according with like specific symbols, your name or earrings or different ornaments on you. And you describe the person. But basically it's a female and man, like us. So at the end, the best thing that I can say to you in terms of my artwork and as an artist is we need to speak loud, we need to make noise, we need to share with other artists, with workers, waitresses, doctors, etc. We need to make our society strong every day, but we need to speak. We need to speak loud, we need to speak with our objects. And there's people listen us every day. Thank you.
Did you learn doing your embroidery just for this project?
Yes. Well, talking with Nahum and Eric last night, at some point in elementary schools, we have the chance for, in my case, for the Mother's Day, like try to embroider a carpet for the table. So it's like every 2 hours, every day is like just embroidery. And it was a good experience. My grandmother, my aunts, my mom, they embroidery at some point. Basically, the story is I took the background for these embroideries came from a place called Tenango in Mexico. It's up north Mexico City. Hidalgo is the state. Tenango is a small town, and they do like this kind of like surrealistic embroideries, like specific animals, flowers, like a kind of collage on it, different colors. And I decided to do that because at that time I was traveling back and forth, Mexico City, Vancouver, with the workers, the farmers' workers that comes to Canada to work. So like talking experiences, stories, I decided that the embroidery would be the best option to do that. Plus my sister-in-law, she knew that we went to Mexico, and he's like, could you bring me these embroideries? I want to use it for pillows. So my wife asked me, like, you know these embroideries? Like, of course, like it's the embroideries from Tenango. So eventually, all that things stay at that time in my mind. So I decided to use the materials I think was perfect. There's no information. I didn't, long time ago I went there. So basically I decided to go through online, Google it, go to YouTube and try to see how they do it. They don't do like these kind of things. Of course, they're doing like more interesting and beautiful things, but I took them from them. And yeah, I just go back to the codex and all the information in terms of pictograms and things like that. Mm-hmm. I want to sit here.
I was just wondering, you use the term Latin America, and I guess my question is, I mean, what is Latin America? Because there's so many, I'm not sure how you're using it and what it's referring to for you and maybe others as well. Is that a term you're using for the Western audience, or is that a term that's internally used as well? Because there's so many cultures and nations involved in what, the general idea that I have of Latin America. So what does Latin America mean to you?
Want to start?
Just
Latin America, basically for me, it's an utopian idea about how we conceive ourselves in society. But it came from mostly the independence movements with Simón Bolívar, Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico, like all these ideas, like we're all together because we share the same background in terms of colonization mostly. Like the most part of us, we speak Spanish. Portugal at some point used to be part of the Spanish Empire. They used to call it Iberoamerica, more like the Iberian area in Spain. And then when the French tried to like create a French colony in Latin America, they start using the term Latin America, like the Latin language. So we're the same. France came with all this like philosophical idea of like being Latin America. And the most part of the people who fought the independence, they studied in France. And they have like all these ideas about progressive ideas from France. So eventually they just decide to absorb the process of like we are Latin America.
So does someone from Nicaragua or Honduras, do they consider themselves part of this notion of Latin America? Or is this, so my question is this something that is a notion that's easily consumable by Western society?
By Western society.
Or do people from these multiple countries and cultures also have this notion of belonging to Latin America?
Yes, there's a big community thinking like we're Latin America. Of course, we have our differences. The Argentinians probably could think that the Mexicans are the worst country, but at the end they're Latin Americans and we're friends and we share the history, as I said. Of course, there's also like different relationships between the thing that I noticed here is like we used to separate the concept of Latin America and the Caribbeans. But for the old speech about Latin America, the Caribbeans are included. Even at some point, Philippines were included because it used to be a Spanish colony and they speak Spanish at some point. So yeah, I mean, yes and no at some point.
I just wanted to add that when, like I was little in Honduras in primary school, we learned that, like we learned that the world was divided in 4 continents, right? America was one, Europe, Asia, and Africa. And, well, 5 continents. Oceania was the other one, like Australia and New Zealand, no? But then when I came to the north, like I learned that from here, like the whole American continent was divided into the Americas, no? The Caribbean, the Central America, South America, and then Mexican or Canada, that's the North America, right?
Which is considered North America.
Yeah, because of course, right, the U.S. took the continent's name, right, the America, right, that comes from Vespucio, American Vespucio. Yeah. But as a Hondurans, I believe that we're kind of like a colony, right, like from the States, and probably we're really fit into this concept of Latin America, no? So, and every little country in Latin America, like Haiti is part of Latin America as well, right? Like, and it's one of the most important countries historically, right? Like the first country who fought for independence, and of course was a French colony, and was indebted by the French colony because they have to pay to be free, and so, and the country who has suffered the most in Latin America, no? So I believe it's a kind of like a concept that is on debate still.
Sorry, I want to say something, but I think it's a beautiful expression. It's so powerful. The idea of like, even we don't know who we are at some point. Like, of course, we're Mexicans, we're from Honduras, or we're Brazilians, but at some point, like this kind of word, like Latin America, is like so powerful at some point and so poetic. Like when you read it, and there's a Paco Ignacio Taibo, a writer in Mexico, a Mexican writer. He always saying like, it's not beautiful, isn't beautiful? Like, call us Latin America. And he always like dreaming and smiling, and he's in conferences with other people, theories, economical theories, Mexican theories, and he's like, yeah, but we have our problems, and we have discussions, and we're not the same. And Paco Ignacio Taibo was like, yeah, but isn't beautiful? Like, call us Latin America? It's amazing. And at the end, the guy's like, oh, I can talk with you, I can talk with writers. And of course, he started to develop the speech poetically in terms of what Latin America is. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just want to add that to that expression.
I was kind of there when you were doing your install and doing other things. Do you just start drawing on the wall and then step away and someone else may come in and finish those lines and they merge into various forms? Or do you each sort of have a image in mind that you work with?
You wanna? Okay. Well, when we get to a new space, like for example, Arnica, we have nothing in mind, right?
Right.
All we carry with us is just the materials, like the little container where we keep all the paper and pencils and pastels, and we have nothing in mind. How we communicate, I believe we perform more like like musical band, right? Except the musical band has, they have their own music. I mean, the songs that they will sing.
But like a jazz.
Yeah, like a jazz. It's kind of like we improvise. Like we respond to each other's lines, marks, and visual elements, right? So that's how we, like create our discourse. And for us, like Eric said, like the process is so important, right? It's like we're making, like a road in the process, right? Without even knowing where we're going, but, like somehow getting to a place, like a unknown place. Or
sometimes we do have an idea in mind, and you start with that idea translating, and you turn your side, and the other guy just did something. So your intuition, it gets modified, and then you just gotta, So, but because the final result is not what we're aiming, it's okay. And even better, it's gonna wash out
what is important is that, like sometimes, like any little thing that, or preconceived thing or idea that we have in mind can be really solved with a small element, right? Like in one occasion, I remember we were doing this on Cito piece, and we had this, like a huge wall, like this one right in here. And, like this guy, like he's, the first one, to start a piece, right? Like he just jumped and, but, like we did a small square, right? Like in the center.
Messed me up.
Big time. And it's interesting because that little square condition everything, right? Like, like everything kind of like evolved from that little square. And so that's an amazing
Don't do that.
thing.
And we do spend a certain amount of energy trying to make the piece cohesive. So sometimes it can look a little bit fragmented, and then we say, okay, what can we do to try to bring all the elements or the two elements that are fighting to kind of make it flow. So
Yeah, and obviously
and
it's always conflict, right?
and each of us has, like we were saying before, different strengths and weaknesses. So like we tend to, I might be the one who does more collage, whereas they might be the ones who do larger figures, so there is like a little bit of play in terms of trying to balance it out.
In a way, it really reflects our life, right? Like, like each one of us come from different backgrounds. And like, for example, my background has been pretty chaotic, and I start, even in my individual work, like I start from chaos and, like getting some order from chaos. And so, which is, like how we start, like how we work. And so that's really interesting, because at the end of the day, like at the end of the piece we're doing, like it really reflects a lot of conflicting, like concepts and ideas, that full of ambiguity and, like sometimes very poetic. And people can see some, like read it, like put their own, input in reading the piece, that they can come out with even political statements.
I have a question about work. Would you, as a collective, consider yourself cultural workers as well? When you mentioned, cultural worker and this is work. I mean, what I'm doing is work, and you get into a gallery, you trust the process of work. You've been doing it for 14 years. We get there, we trust this process, and we just get to work, then it'll happen.
Yeah.
And it becomes intuitive after a while. In terms of inherited thoughts that come from other places, is there a lot of Marxist underpinning to this?
Yeah. Well, we, like as we say, like we work with no preconceived ideas, like viscerally, but at the same time, we're just humans, right? Like we're not islands, like so, whatever happens in our surroundings really affect us, and we just filter those, like issues or like things that really live daily. So in that way, I mean, we're cultural workers, right? Like we have a lot of, like things, like we live in Toronto, for example, and we're part of this huge diaspora, right? That, like operates, like in Toronto, very multicultural city.
It's not just, I think, a cultural worker. It's just like the idea of worker, like work for the society.
Okay, that's sort of what I was asking.
Yeah, all the
Is it
Marxism, yeah.
something that's inherited, or is it something that actually comes out of the sheet of culture?
Historically, it comes out like at some point in Latin America when artists, mostly in the South with all the dictatorships that happened, 60s and 70s, like the artists start to understand that they have to be being involved about what happened in the country. So basically, they were the information that at some point the mass media didn't give to the population or the society. So basically, the artists start to produce artwork or print pamphlets or doing magazines to share in this, like, this is the truth, or this is what happened at least in the union, so this is what happened in the market and things like that.
Or murals.
Exactly. So Mexico has the idea with the muralism, the idea of like being more politically active as an artist and teach the society, try to create a big educational system. Kind of fail at some point, but the idea is there. It's like how you, as an artist, you're just part of your society. Like you're not like detached.
Yeah. I was also curious because you picked embroidery, because in our culture, embroidery belongs to women, and it was considered craft,
Yes.
not art for so long. And so it's an interesting parallel, in a way, of people who have been disenfranchised by a system that you pick embroidery. I mean, it's not your only medium, obviously.
Yeah.
But it is one that has been traditionally disenfranchised.
Yeah, and talking with them last night in the gallery, talking about embroideries. Also, it's a material that I can use, and the process is like, why not? Like, I have like millions of opportunities to use any kind of materials, and I found this the perfect ones to do it. And yeah, also the differences between, I understand the process, and we talked about that, about the question, considering as a craft, but also when we use it as a contemporary artist, automatically the place and the people who does the artwork, like just like upgrade the level in terms of, for example, my embroideries, they're not craft, they're contemporary art. It's also just the people and where you move it. I consider all the crafts that indigenous communities did or do, and women's, like, it's art. Like these ideas of contemporary art, modern art, and like we need to forget that, and postmodernism too.
Well, it's exclusionary.
Yeah, it's not exclusionary. It's like time change. I don't know. Like I used to did it. I love it. It's a really good exercise, not just for your hand, it's for your brain. Like so liberated, and I love it. I mean, you end exhausted, of course, but I love it. It's a beautiful process.
Questions for Ms. Collective. I'm just wondering how your collective has affected your identity, your individual identities as an artist. Like, do you still maintain a solo practice, or has your practice taken on the shape of this collaborative effort exclusively?
Yeah, we still maintain our individual practices, and we want to just make sure when we do our individual, like some things just go subconsciously, and then you start seeing things on your work that you might borrow from the other ones. But if you see our individual practices, they're very different and linear, or not linear, but yeah, they're very different, and they have their own voice, I would say. But sometimes, yeah, inevitably things happen, but with the collective, we want, or we are aiming to dissolve the individual completely and try to produce something as a group. And one of the questions that we always have is like, oh, okay, that's your mural, but what did you do? And I said, like, no, well, I did that, but then he did that, and then she did that. So it's when we are trying to dissolve the individual, and in this society that it's praising or pushing more for the individuality, I think it's a valuable effort to try to make a collective and try to and sometimes you create like a monster with two heads and one leg, and it's going maybe nowhere, but the effort is there, and the experiment is valid, I think.
Another thing is that we, as individually we work with different mediums. Like for example, in my case, I use a lot of like repurposed material, like objects. Mixed media, I work with a lot of water-based mediums and organic, and like we use, like in my case, I use drawing as a medium, as a communication too. But yes, the thoughts is totally, I believe, different. But really affects, like our careers as well, in the way that we learn a lot from each other. Like we get a lot of energy from the collective as well, and that's really rewarding.
And what's been nice about working together is like we've had the opportunity to travel and to do these shows that we don't necessarily have the same opportunities as solo artists.
One thing that in arts, we have to, constantly, we have to be constantly learning, like from what is happening and, like what influences us and things like that. And with the collective, help us in that way too.
Just before we get to more questions, it's past 1:30. So if there are people who need to go to something else,
I'm gonna go now.
That is the studio visits. Some people who don't have a studio space and they stay here.
the studio visits are going to start in the fourth year studio. There's a sheet if you want to talk about your work with either of the artists. There's a sign-up sheet on the fourth year studio door. Just have the names here around. There's some slots available. We'll give it on. Great. And if you filled out your questionnaire, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Start with Dave.
Thank you for coming.
Did you use one?
Ya te vas a una punta.
Sí, sí, sí.
We should do a collaborative project. They just put up sheets all the way around the wall in either the drawing or painting studio, and everyone would do their own project. It used to be Monday mostly.
So there's still a few questions here.
Off record? Okay, you can ask wherever you want.
You're good?
Yeah.
Good with more questions?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right. I was wondering for the collective if your images are referential of spiritual aspects from your historical culture, like shamanism or origin stories.
There's definitely references, but I think they're go subconsciously. It's not like we, or the way I see it, we don't just go and say like, okay, like this particular image of whatever culture looks really nice, and we can take it as a starting point. I think we work more from the inside to the outside, if you will. And intuitive and sometimes with abstraction, going towards the figurative and or the mix of both, and definitely for our upbringing and our visual culture, if you want, those things they came out, but I think they're not necessarily that we said like we went to a museum. Or
What I believe is that like we carry with us a lot of like archetypes. Like for example, like where I grew up, we had a lot of beliefs. Like a lot of beliefs. We like came from this small village. Like my family was Catholic, but at the same time, we had a lot of like syncretism, right? Like indigenous and Catholic beliefs that would somehow fuse. And when I was studying, like I went back to dig into my upbringings and found out that a lot of my beliefs were not really, like Catholics. Yes. Like a lot of myths, that we have, and somehow, like when you're little, you're influenced, by a lot of, like things that you learn, wherever you're, like, especially if you're taken to a church or, to a castle or whatever, right? Like it's, cathedral. And so I believe, unconscious will reflect a lot of these links to spiritual, but like we don't really think about them.
I have a question. Now that the tape is not rolling anymore, right, Leon?
I'm filming.
We'll trim this out. Do you see a difference between Canada and the U.S. in relation to Latin American relationships?
You want me to?
Who wants to talk about that?
Yeah.
I know what I see, but
Yes, I can say yes, but I think it's also in terms of history. At the beginning, at least in Mexico, like the big country was US to progress, to be more like have more income, have like a better life. Like we were absorbed by the American dream at some point. And eventually, mostly the Mexicans who works in farmers or Central Americas, they start like all this marvelous movement called Chicano movement. Mm-hmm. And they make presence. I think in Canada, the difference is Canada absorbed the cultures, but at some point it's sometimes hard to be connected. It's like, or my experience in Vancouver is more like, I'm part of the society, I'm part of a family. My wife is from Canada, but she has a Brazilian and French American background. So even for her, the idea of being Canadian is kind of twist, like yeah, I was born here, but that, like my background is in other places as well. And like, I think personally speaking, through my art is try to do that, like try to connect and say like, I have this background from 30 years living in Mexico and be related to Latin America, so what I need to produce a different kind of artwork, or what I need to produce according to the spectrum of Canadian art. Like I have to produce Latin American art connected with Canadian art, create a kind of syncretic art, mm-hmm. and be present and be participated in the society, like participate in my profession.
Would it be different if you lived in the States, do you think?
I think.
I know that's hypothetical and
Yeah,
I have no idea, but.
I don't want to live there, but but I think because there's a big Latin American heritage. I don't say it's easy to connect, but maybe it depends where you're going. It will be easier to produce and be more active with a community which is already based on something.
Yeah.
And I think maybe in the U.S. also the Chicano culture might kind of meld with the Latin American culture. So I know like in Los Angeles and in Texas, there is quite an active Latin American art community.
In my experience, I was living in the USA and previous coming to Canada, and it's a huge difference, like I found there, like I was working like as a dishwasher, for example, like and attending school at the same time. And for example, the school I used to attend, it was a marginalized school, right? It was a high school for minorities. And like there were like close to 5,000 students in that school. And all of these students came from marginalized communities, right? Like we have to take buses. It would take us almost, like more than 1 hour to get to school and to study. And it was a school full of problems. Like it was really hard to concentrate, and then coming to Canada, like, of course, like in the way I grew up, with all of these conflicts, the Cold War and all the intervention of the states in Latin America, like especially in Honduras, like fighting the Contras that operated where I grew up in Nanli, Honduras, and yeah, the Contras will fight the Sandinistas. And so I had this image. I could see for example, the airplanes, like fighting, killing people, like the U.S. airplane fighting, killing Sandinistas or Nicaraguans. And so I had all of these ugly kind of like images, and my father and some other families were, like they died because of this Cold War situation. So yes, I had all of this reality of the involvement of the states, And coming to Canada, like it was totally different, right? Like over here, I came here, the situation was different, I had the opportunity to go to school, didn't see that, those margins as the states. And so, looking back, to the, Canadian or Canada and the US, involving in situations, especially cold situations, I see a huge difference. And so, yeah, I believe Canada is moving in the right way.
No more questions? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I knew you were panicking about 100 people.
It's good.